After his defeat in round 2 against Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura was looking to hit back today. He had the white pieces, so a good opportunity to try and get going. He was playing Shahriar Mamedyarov. Started out as a Caro-Kann, and typically Nakamura chose to keep as much tension in the position as possible by playing this advanced variation, so no pieces being exchanged. Now, I'm going to skip to the good bit and go through these next moves very quickly. All I can say is that this is a very theoretical line. But yeah, a lot of tension in the position. And here the main move is castles. Now, no doubt Mamedyarov was well prepared for this. In fact, I noticed looking through my database, there's actually a game between Gashimov and Ivanchuk from 2011, and Gashimov won a really nice game against Ivanchuk with this move. But Nakamura said today that he wanted to be a bit creative, to do something different, and instead of that he took on c5. But afterwards he was less than impressed with his own continuation. Now, with knight b5 he does threaten a couple of checks here, which forces the king to not the best square, but black has this very solid, typical French pawn structure actually, and the bishop is outside the pawn chain, and really black shouldn't have any difficulties here at all. Because the position is relatively closed, it doesn't matter that the king is blocking the rooks. But let's see what happened. Here Mamedyarov chose to play a slightly risky move. After the game he said, well, you know, basically black could have just played like this, and you know, the position is about equal. There's not too much going on here. I don't think black should be in any danger at all. You know, it's very soon the king is going to come to e7, or you know, possibly g6 and king g7, and there should be no difficulties at all. But instead, Mamedyarov played this move, queen b4. Now, what he wants to do is tempt this move b3, and then there's a weakness on c3, and it's going to make it easier for black to attack down the c file. But Nakamura was delighted to see this move because it gave him the opportunity to sacrifice the pawn on b2. Now, while black's king is in this slightly awkward position, you don't really want to open lines, but, well, Mamedyarov, as he said, he wanted something a bit more interesting. He didn't want to get a dull position. But this is risky. So black is still a pawn up, but now the rook is on the 7th rank, and that's potentially nasty. Mamedyarov did well here. He exchanged off that one of the knights, and here, well, he saw that he could play rook b8, and probably white's best is to exchange off, and then before black is able to organise himself, just liquidate here. And, well, it's an extra pawn, but probably not for long. Basically, white is ahead in development, so has time to attack this, and it's going to peter out to a draw. Well, Mamedyarov saw that, but he wanted to keep more tension in the position. I think if you play a move like queen b4 and grab the b2 pawn, then it shows you have ambition. And Mamedyarov played this idea with g5. Now, if he has time to play king g7 and swing the rook across, exchange off white's rook, then he has a very clear advantage. But this was like a red rag to a bull, and Nakamura was delighted to see g5. h4 is an obvious move to prise open black's king side. It also gives the king an escape square on h2, which can be very important later on in the attack. Let's see what happened. I mean, white's moves are actually very easy to play here. If knight takes e5, well, the queen comes in this is threatened, this is threatened, this is... I mean, it's just dreadful. It's all over. So queen a5. Mamedyarov, of course, would like to exchange queens, but that's blocked. Okay, he exchanged and played the knight to f5, but, you know, white doesn't need to prove too much here. With this rook on the 7th and black's king in a dreadful position, it's just great for white. You know, if black holds on to this pawn with h5, then bishop d3, a simple move, ready to exchange this off, move the queen in, push this. I mean, black's king is getting cut to shreds there. So Mamedyarov pressed on with d4, but this is pretty awful. If pawn takes, then the queen goes in, and I mean, this is not difficult for white to play, and black is just blown away here. So queen takes c3 happened in the game. Of course, the queen steps aside, and if the pawn advances, then queen e4 is a great move. Nakamura showed a pretty variation after the game, not a difficult variation. Now, just watch out, because there's a rook that's potentially on pretest. So not queen takes pawn, but this is very nice. Not so difficult, but there's just one variation which is fun to see. Here we give a check, and the king has to step back here, and then it's just a winning attack. The point is that if king d7 attempting to run away and maintain connection, then e6 is unfortunate for black. This check, and then white takes the queen. In the game, Mamedyarov took on h4, but this is incredibly easy for white to play. Rook takes f7 threatened. The rooks are still split. That's a very nasty move with two threats here. I discovered an attack on the rook on a8, and well, the game ended like this. I mean, it was really terribly simple. That's a lot of firepower on f7. So white's king is safe. There you go. h4. We reveal another point to the pawn move h4. Gives the king an escape square. And here it's all over. You can do it with checks. The king gets pushed up, and in this position black actually resigned. If king d5, rook b5 check just wins black's queen. A disappointing game from Mamedyarov, who now has half out of 3. But, well, Hikaru Nakamura finished the game off very well, but this was a gift for him, actually. Okay, let's take a look at another game from round 3 between Sergei Karyakin and Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen with the black pieces today. We joined the game after 44 moves. The pawn structure here, these doubled c-pawns and the locked pawns in the middle of the board, will tell you that the opening was a Nimzo-Indian defence. And Carlsen got a good position after the opening. And this is kind of a logical position that's reached for in the game. Carlsen is still a lot better in this position. Basically, these two pawns are potentially weak. Now, Carlsen has to watch out for the pawn on d6, but this can be covered fairly easily. Black stands better here. Carlsen decided he wanted to chase down the knight on g7. Now, his first thought was to play knight f4, and he considered this continuation. And then king f7, and he wanted to reach this angle. The knight is trapped, so it has to play to f5. And he wanted to play this position, and he felt that black should have reasonable winning chances here. Should be able to round up this pawn eventually. I mean, it's not simple. But at the last moment in this position, he got worried about, instead of knight f5, this funny move, bishop d1. And here, well, remember this is en prise, but instead of recapturing the bishop, knight f5 Now white is a piece down here, but somehow Carlsen got spooked here and thought that maybe white would have some chances here, but actually that's not the case. This knight spins around to one of these squares and black should be winning. But he wanted to avoid any complications and played king f7 immediately. And he was thinking, well then knight f5, you take, and the king comes back to defend the pawn, and again we reach this endgame. But instead, Karyakin sacrificed a piece with bishop takes pawn. Now of course, Carlsen had foreseen this idea. He thought when he had considered this that he could simply play bishop f3 to put some pressure here, but had overlooked that in this position white can actually draw this game, draw the position very easily with this. And now e5 check. And if king e6, then bishop f5. Of course that can't be taken, the pawn goes through, and this is just a draw. So let's go back. Now there are other ways to play for a win there, but basically bishop f3 is, Carlsen didn't like it. So instead he brought the knight back. But now white has sufficient compensation. Black would very much like to blockade these pawns, of course, on e5, so this move springs to mind. So if you can control e5, then the pawns aren't going anywhere. But white is fine after this. You take, and then play king f4. And in this position, basically, white's king is much too strong in combination with advancing the pawn, so black can't entertain that idea. So Carlsen came back, but now the pawns are rolling forward. I mean, if black is actually a little bit careless, things can actually go wrong here. Karyakin played a good move. He exchanged off and played bishop d6, and he's taking this pawn, and this is just too much. These pawns are too strong. And although the players fought on, actually the fighting spirit of both players was actually very impressive here. Karyakin didn't bother defending that pawn. He played this in order to get his pawns rolling down the board and improve the position of his king. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. This position should be a draw. But let's just see how the game concluded. In fact, Carlsen really can't make any headway against these pawns. Even sometimes, the king can slip around here, but of course, black can always put the brakes on, and Magnus gave the piece back, and in this position, well, the players agreed to a draw. There's really not a lot going on in this position. So another long game from Carlsen, but he didn't quite manage to clinch it, although he felt he had decent winning chances, but it wasn't to be today. So after 3 rounds, we have Magnus Carlsen with 2.5 points. Karyakin, Nakamura, Caruana and Radyabov all on 1.5. Mamedyarov on half. In the other game today, Radyabov and Caruana drew a pretty boring game. Thanks for watching.